This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
This is The World Today, 15 minutes of the latest news from around the world. I am Peninah Karibe in Nairobi. Coming up, at least 38 people killed as a fire sweeps through a ferry in Bangladesh. South Korea pardons jailed former President Park Geun-hye. And an encouraging early signal, British government data shows Omicron carries less risk of severe illness. At least 38 people have been killed in Bangladesh after a deadly fire swept through a ferry in the southern district of Jalakati. The death toll could climb further as more than 50 people have been admitted to hospital. Jalakati District Administrator Zohor Ali says some passengers are still missing and some others are in critical condition. The fire started from the engine room of the ferry at around 3 a.m. local time. The cause of that fire is not clear. Investigations are underway. Former President of South Korea Park Geun-hye expressed her gratitude after being pardoned. Park first apologized to the South Korean people, saying she was deeply sorry for her actions. Park also thanked President Moon Jae-in's pardon amid staunch opposition. Park was sentenced to over 22 years on corruption charges. Our correspondent Jack Batten has the story from Seoul.
Many people in President Moon Jae-in's own party, many supporters, angry by this decision. It's something that President Moon had always indicated that he would not do. Park Geun-hye, of course, the daughter of a large political family here. Her father, Park Chung-hee, ruled with an iron fist, but is credited with creating the economic miracle out of which modern-day South Korea grew. He was assassinated by the head of his own intelligence agency. Park Geun-hye watched her own mother being assassinated. After all of this, she herself came up the political ladder and managed to get the presidency herself before being embroiled in one of the biggest political scandals this country's ever had, one that even saw the deputy head of Samsung in prison for a while. In fact, the court case is still ongoing. So, yeah, look, this is a big surprise. It's a big case, and we can hear a little bit now from the Justice Ministry about the decision behind this release.
정부는 2021년 12월 31일자로
As of December 31st, 2021, the government will grant special pardon to a total of 3,094 people, including general criminal offenders, small and medium-sized business owners, special consideration prisoners, a former president, election criminals, social conflict cases, and abortion offenders. We've included former President Park Geun-hye and former Prime Minister Han Myung-suk to the list to overcome the unfortunate past history and the crisis of COVID-19, realize people's unity, and provide a chance to take a new step forward to the future.
President Moon himself said this could act as a national unifying moment, though many people doubting that. She's due to be released New Year's Eve. That's what the Justice Ministry is saying. What we do know for sure is there'll be a large number of her supporters around the prison at that time, no doubt celebrating the fact she's being released. But we can also expect a large number of people who called for her impeachment in the first place. People who were part of the huge rallies in the middle of Seoul and other parts of the country that led to that impeachment, they're also very likely to be at that prison protesting her release.
Here's a brief look back at Park's political career. She became the country's first female president in 2013, casting herself as the daughter of the nation. In 2017, she was impeached and ousted after a corruption scandal sparked massive protests. She was found to have colluded with a close friend to receive bribes from conglomerates, including Samsung. The 69-year-old had been serving a 20-year prison sentence for bribery and abuse of power, with another 2 years for election law violations. Turning now to the pandemic, British government data show the risk of hospitalization is lower from the Omicron variant compared with Delta. But they also show Omicron could still lead to large numbers of cases needing hospital treatment given its higher transmissibility. Early data by the Health Security Agency show a person with Omicron was between 50% and 70% less likely to be admitted to hospital compared with someone with Delta. The agency called the finding an encouraging early signal, but stressed more research is required for confirmation. The British Prime Minister has urged the public to get jabbed in his Christmas Eve message. Michael Voss has more from London.
This may be the age of Omicron, but that didn't deter hundreds of New Age revellers crowding around Stonehenge, celebrating the winter solstice, most without masks. Yet in central London, the streets are much quieter than normal, far fewer shoppers in the run-up to Christmas, and many of the West End theatres closed. The biggest queues are outside vaccination centres as people line up for their third booster vaccines. More than 6 million booster jabs were given in the past week, and more than half the population is now triple jabbed. But with a record 106,000 new cases reported in the UK, there are still fears that this could overload the health service. Hospitals are also worried that large numbers of staff are having to self-isolate.
A major problem for us is staffing. So most of our staff are fully vaccinated, but they still have to isolate if they're contacts, and we still have had staff contract COVID, and that puts huge pressure on our systems. We are always kind of running with just enough staff, and anything that puts that in danger is a real problem.
While much of the developed world is rapidly rolling out booster jabs, the World Health Organization remains concerned that the poorer nations are not being vaccinated.
It's frankly difficult to understand how a year since the first vaccines were administered, 3 in 4 health workers in Africa remain unvaccinated. While some countries are now rolling out blanket booster programs, only half of WHO's member states have been able to reach the target of vaccinating 40% of their populations by the end of the year, because of distortions in global supply.
Britain's former Prime Minister Gordon Brown has called the poor global vaccine rollout a stain on our soul. For the moment, no extra restrictions are being imposed in England before Christmas, with the government saying it needs more data before deciding what to do next. Michael Voss, CGTN, London.
Spain's tourism-dependent economy has seen a big rebound this year. A successful vaccination drive and low infection rates have made it the country of choice for many tourists. But the rise of Omicron cases across Europe means the future of the crucial sector remains uncertain. Raul Patak has more.
Another busy morning at the Roommate Hotel Alba in central Madrid. Occupancy levels are getting back up to where they were 2 years ago. The majority of visitors are foreigners coming to enjoy a city break, and tourism figures show that Madrid, like the rest of Spain, is bouncing back, reaching 2/3 of its pre-pandemic levels. That has allowed the hospitality industry to finally get back on its feet and offer much-needed job opportunities. 1 in 8 people in Spain work in the sector.
The last 18 months have been tough, but it has improved now. We're delighted finally to welcome back guests from both Spain and abroad. We want to serve our clients, and for that we need our staff. Thankfully, today most of our staff are now back at work.
Now, the hospitality industry depends largely on the freedom of movement for those entering the country. Now, this year that has been helped with the launch of the COVID digital certificate and the global vaccination drive. Forecasts show that next year could see a return to pre-pandemic levels. To help slow the transmission of new variants, tourist spots such as the Costa Blanca have insisted on COVID certificates. Each region will continue to assess the situation. The government has also pledged a series of funds through the EU, up to $800 million, to help digitise the industry. But leading experts feel the most pressing issue is still the same.
Es un problema de caída de demanda.
We had huge fall in demand that happened because of the insecurity created by the pandemic. So the only way to recover our industry is to recover demand. That will only be possible when people feel safe. We have to win the battle against COVID, regardless of which variant arises.
Me da igual la variante que sea.
Optimism can be short-lived in this industry, and any economic projections for 2022 will no doubt depend largely on how Europe tackles the immediate threat of new COVID variants and the impact they may have. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
The Omicron variant is now in all 50 US states. The number of new confirmed cases topped 242,000 on Wednesday, pushing the 7-day average to above 171,000. That's higher than the peak of the Delta variant just a few months ago. New York and Illinois have the highest numbers of cases. New York City is scaling back New Year's Eve celebrations, with revelers in Times Square limited to 15,000 compared with the usual more than 1 million. Still in the United States, a former police officer has been found guilty of manslaughter after she drew a gun instead of a taser and killed Donte Wright, a black man. On Thursday, a jury in Minnesota convicted Kimberly Porter in the shooting in April. She pulled over 20-year-old Donte Wright at a traffic stop and shot him in the chest with a gun, which she claims she mistook for a taser. Porter will be sentenced in February. She faces up to 15 years in prison. After the verdict, supporters of Wright cheered outside the court, and Wright's mother spoke to reporters.
Oh my gosh. The moment that we heard guilty on the manslaughter 1, emotions, every single emotion that you could imagine just running through your body at that moment. I kind of let out a yelp because it was built up in the anticipation of what was to come while we were waiting for the last few days. And now we've been able to process it. We want to thank the entire prosecution team. We want to thank community support, everybody who's been out there that has supported us in this long fight for accountability.
The U.S. Navy said they seized a cargo of illicit weapons from a fishing boat they claimed was smuggling weapons from Iran to Houthi rebels in Yemen. U.S. officials said they boarded the boat on December 20th in the North Arabian Sea. The stateless vessel was carrying nearly 1,400 AK-47 rifles and more than 220,000 rounds of ammunition. They confiscated the weapons, seized the 5 crew members and sank the boat. The crew will be repatriated. Iran-backed Houthi rebels have been fighting the internationally recognized government in Yemen, which is supported by a Saudi-led coalition. The fighting in Yemen has taken its toll on the 30 million population, where over 80% requires humanitarian assistance. And that's it for this edition of The World Today. I'll be back shortly with more news from around the continent on Africa Live. Thanks for watching.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Libya's parliament tries to chart a path out of the current election crisis, but challenges remain. Ethiopia rules out sending troops into the conflict zone in Tigray. And France and more than 10 allies condemned the alleged deployment of Russian mercenaries in Mali. This is Africa Live. Hello and thank you for joining us. I'm Peninah Karibe. Also coming up, in business, Tunisia drafts an economic reform plan as it seeks a new agreement with the IMF. In sports, South African figure skating champion Matthew Samuels all set for glory at the Beijing Winter Olympics. Libya's parliament is expected to meet on Monday to debate a new timeline for elections. Parliament has also ordered the formation of a committee to create a roadmap to ensure the completion of the electoral process. This is after the Electoral Commission cancelled presidential elections slated for today. It cites disputes over rules, including the eligibility of several divisive candidates.
The announcement to delay Libya's presidential election by a month is seen as a big blow to a peace process aimed at bringing an end to violence since an uprising ousted Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. It has also crushed hopes of many Libyans with a desire to determine their future. Large number of Libyans had already registered for voting cards for the election.
We had great hopes to hold elections on the 24th of December, to choose the person who can lead us to the shores of peace and to take Libya out of the chaos that it is in. But today, we were shocked by the decision we've had. I heard it through the social media. It disappointed all of us this morning. But hopefully, we will keep our votes and wait for January 24th and give our votes to the person that deserves them.
We refuse any attempt to take over popular will, which has expressed its will to hold the elections on December 24th. We know that time has passed for that date, but we emphasize and insist the session to be held in Parliament on December 27th must call for urgent elections.
With elections now expected in January, some critics wonder whether a month is time enough to resolve the arguments that derailed Friday's vote. There are also fears that a political crisis could add fuel to local disputes between rival armed groups that have mobilized in western Libya in recent weeks. A committee created to address the current challenges in the electoral process is expected to submit their proposal within 1 week. Chamhono, CGTN.
Libya's delayed presidential election could be a relief to the Elections Committee, which couldn't issue a final list of candidates thus far. But the delay may bring Libya back to political conflicts that puts the future of the country at risk. More on this with CGTN's Adel Mahrouri.
Officially, the December 24 presidential election in Libya has not been delayed. That's because there is no entity in Libya that has the authority to make that call. Still, many Libyan politicians appear willing to accept the Elections Committee's suggestion to delay the vote by 1 month. But now Libya enters an authoritative vacuum, as no entity can exclusively set a new date for the vote.
Whether it's the 24th of January or even several months later, we cannot speculate which date the election will be held on. There are many divisions in Libya. There is no agreement over a constitutional foundation to legally guide the country's transition, so the fate of any future date could be the same as that of the December 24th vote.
The political scene in Libya gets more complicated as the fate of the UN-backed interim government has raised controversy. Through UN-sponsored talks, Libyans agreed that the cabinet should govern the country until the December 24 vote. Parliament passed a no-confidence vote against the government in September, and interim Prime Minister Abdulhamid Dbeibeh stepped aside, delegating his deputy to take over the cabinet while he focuses on running for president.
With the parliament's no-confidence vote, Dbeibeh's government is considered sacked and is acting as a facilitation cabinet. I believe this means it has no specified duration in office. Its task ends with appointment of a new government. Biber's government could remain in place until the elections are held.
The election committee says that all appeals against presidential candidates must reach a final verdict in court before it can announce the final list of runners in the race. A delay in the Libyan election could also see an increase in logistical arrangements for the vote. By the time Libyans are invited to the ballots, more citizens will have come of age to be eligible voters or candidates for either the presidential or parliamentary races. And that could force the Elections Committee to update its voters list, distribute and issue new voting cards. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And for more on this, we're joined by Sarah Kira. She is a political analyst and director of European North Africa Center for Research, and she's live for us in Cairo. Sarah, Libya's parliament wants a committee formed to work on a roadmap to delayed elections. What do you see as a way out of the current crisis?
First of all, thank you for having me. This crisis, for the viewers to understand more what's happening on the ground in Libya. Today, this crisis is the peak of the political tension that Libya has been witnessing in the past decade. And it's a merely proof of the institutional division and the public even division in Libya. We see the division on all levels in Libya between the people, because of course of the nature of the Libyan people, it's based on families and it's a tribal nature. So this division has been an outcome, of course, of the political turmoil and everything that took place in Libya in the past 10 years, as your report mentioned. But today we see the peak of that, the peak of the division. We see the crushing of the peace process. Yet, to have a way out of this crisis, there has to be a constitutional framework to organize the elections and a good security to the elections and a big proof that the voters will really have their votes and the results of their votes out without any tensions. Today we witness a big conflict on the candidates, and there is no framework to choose the candidates from. We see people behind each candidate, and not only people, we also witness militias dividing the people and dividing the political interests of the people between the candidates. Like every candidate has a militia behind his back. So even if the elections take place, are we sure that the opponents will hold the results of these elections okay, and there will be no conflicts with using the guns and everything that we have witnessed? Tomorrow, Benghazi, one of the cities that will witness big demonstrations in favor of the elections taking place tomorrow on the 24th of December. So we are witnessing today the peak of everything that has been going on. Agreeing on candidates and a constitutional framework, okay, might be better than a very late roadmap today to be agreed on by the parliament today. Seems nonsense, actually. There has to be a constitutional framework for everyone to abide to in Libya and put the interests of Libya as a state over any political tensions.
So there are concerns that a delay of 1 month may not be enough to resolve the disputed issues in Libya. What are your thoughts on this?
Actually, the timeline, there is no obvious timeline what will happen in this month in order for the elections to take place, because the elections have to take place. In order to reach Libya to political stability, the peace process has to be implemented on the ground, and part of the peace process is political stability. Okay, for the nature of Libya and for the peak of tension we're witnessing today, what will happen in this month? What will happen in this month? Is this an enough timeline? I don't think so, because still the problems of Libya prevail, and we still have a lot of controversies on the candidates, and we still have militias behind every candidate, as we've witnessed yesterday. Okay, today I think the smart party is the party that will form a political coalition in order to take and move forward with Libya to the elections and take it to a better results. Political coalition is a must today, and we have seen like symbols of a very like a very near political coalition, but still everything is very misty, and still everything is not clear because of the peak of division we are witnessing today, and it's a merely fight over power in Libya. And of course, let's not forget that we have very, very strong political forces and political candidates running for presidential elections in Libya. So the tension will be really very strong, and the one who will form political collision with the opponents is the one who's going to win.
All right, Sarah Kira, live for us in Cairo. We appreciate those thoughts. Thank you for joining us. 16 Western countries have condemned what they said was the deployment of Russian mercenary forces in the West African country of Mali. France and 14 European allies, as well as Canada, say they deeply regretted the choice of Mali's transitional authorities to pay foreign mercenaries instead of supporting its own armed forces. They say the move only diverts Mali's already scarce public funds. The European Union has reacted with alarm to reports that Russian mercenaries could deploy to Mali to help its government battle Islamist militants linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. The Russian government has denied any links to the mercenaries. Now to Ethiopia's ongoing conflict, the government says its troops will stay in 2 liberated regions and not cross into the conflict zone of Tigray in the north. But it also says necessary measures will be in place to make sure the Tigrayan rebels do not present a threat. Humanitarian sources said airstrikes hit a key power station in Tigray's capital, Mekelle, on Wednesday. Power across the city has been off since. The government hasn't made any comment on the incident. The federal government and the rebels have been at war for over a year. Let's now get the latest from CGTN's Girum Chala. He's live for us from Addis Ababa. Girum, the Ethiopian government says it won't send troops to the conflict zone. Tell us more about this.
So, Peninah, as you've said, the Ethiopian government's announcement of not advancing its troops to further in the Tigray regional state has at least 2 important bases or reasonings, according to the Minister of Communication Services here. The first one, the government is saying that in the Tigray regional state, there are preparations now in order to claim genocide by the TPLF side against the Ethiopian army if the army enters, and that will be another false story that's going to be disseminating across the world. That is the assertion that the government has. So in order to prevent such complicated stories, perhaps the army decided to remain in border areas, both in the Afar and the Amhara regional state side. The second, the other one that the government put as a reason not to enter to the Tigray regional state is in order to also avoid attention from the international community, also to perhaps ease pressures which have been mounting for the last many months and now easing up since the war is subsiding in different sides. So for now, the Ethiopian army, the Ethiopian government has decided not to advance to the Tigray regional state, and it will be remaining in the strongholds that it has retaken from the Tigray force.
And there are reports of airstrikes against rebels continuing in Tigray. What more do we know about this?
Peninah, there is no official communication when it comes to the Ethiopian Air Force conducting airstrikes in the Tigray regional state. So we're not hearing anything from the government side. But TPLF time and again has been complaining about it this week, perhaps 3 times, saying that civilian targets have been hit in different parts of the Tigray regional state, especially by drone attacks by the Ethiopian army. Now, Ethiopia is saying that if a drone attack or an airstrike has been staged, then it was intended to hit military strategic locations in the Tigray regional state, which is intended to prevent any further escalation of conflict, or also keep the Tigray force at bay so that peace can be maintained in the central, also the Amhara and Afar regional states. So these airstrikes are not intended against civilians, they were saying, especially last week. So TPLF continued complaining about it. Civilians have been targeted. Drone strikes have continued, but we cannot really verify this from the government side, as I was saying earlier, Peninah.
All right, we appreciate that update. Thank you very much. Grim Chala live for us in Addis Ababa. This is Africa Live, coming up to 1:30. Let's take a quick break. Coming up, high food prices dampen Christmas celebrations in Nigeria. Kenya's decision to demand proof of vaccination to access public places and transport has been met with mixed reactions as citizens travel home for Christmas. The announcement late Wednesday caught many by surprise, but comes amid a surge in COVID-19 cases in the country. The Health Ministry has said that proof of vaccination of COVID-19 would be required by the 21st of December to access public spaces, but a court in mid-December temporarily halted the rule amid uncertainty over who would police the edict or what to do about citizens unable to access vaccines. Around 3.7 million people are fully vaccinated.
I don't support it because I think it is supposed to be one's own initiative, one's own decision to go get vaccinated, because that seems like people are being forced to be vaccinated because you can't live without accessing government facilities, government services, public facilities. You can't live without that. So it's like people are being forced in an indirect manner.
I took the directive in a good way because the disease has really spread and now we are in the Christmas season. It's good for people to take care of themselves. Safety starts with an individual. It's not a must for the government to put a directive.
It is not the first time that we have been here, but remembering that we had a sanction by Ministry of Health and the national government that after the 21st, you will not be able to access essential and government and public services. That is why we have brought the vaccines so that the community can access them with ease.
Nigeria has destroyed over 1 million doses of outdated COVID-19 vaccines. The batches expired in November. Authorities say they were donated by some international donors just a month before their expiration. CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reports.
Vaccine hesitancy has posed a major challenge for the West African nation, so governments making this public to raise citizens' confidence in its vaccination program.
We have successfully withdrawn about 1,066,214 doses of expired AstraZeneca vaccines. We have come through in our promise to all Nigerians to be transparent. Today is an opportunity for Nigerians to have further faith in our vaccination program.
The shots are part of over 2.5 million doses received from international donors in October. Authorities say they had a very short shelf life.
A few months ago, when these vaccines were offered to us, we knew that they had a short shelf life. But we were living in an environment where the supply of COVID-19 vaccines were very scarce. They were not available due to vaccine nationalism.
The vaccines coming with short expiration dating pose a challenge to us as a country. But because of the love of country, we decided to work with that tight time span or challenge.
Government says it saved up to $40 million from vaccine donations. Meanwhile, the infection rate in Nigeria is witnessing a spike amid a fourth wave of the coronavirus pandemic. The West African nation recorded over 2,000 new COVID-19 infections on Tuesday alone, the highest daily record since January. Only about 10 million Nigerians have been vaccinated so far, and officials say they hope to scale up efforts in order to vaccinate up to half of its population by next year. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
In many parts of Nigeria, Christmas is a time to feast with family and friends while exchanging gifts. But this year, many feel there's little to share with neighbors. Last year's crash in the price of oil, Nigeria's main export, led to acute shortages of forex and put pressure on the naira currency, leaving the population yearning for stability in prices and exchange rates. CGTN's Alexandria Majala has more.
At a crowded market in Nigeria's commercial capital, Lagos, 27-year-old Blessing Abba negotiates the price of a turkey and other food items. Abba, like many people, is shopping for Christmas. She paid 2,500 naira for the turkey, up 25% from 2 months ago, while the 10 tomatoes she used to get for 200 naira are now reduced to 7. A harsh reminder the prices in Africa's biggest economy are still rising sharply, even though inflation has eased.
For Christmas, shopping now is a whole lot because things are more expensive than before. I mean, last time 2 months ago, I came to market with 10,000 naira and I went home with a big bag. But right now, I'm going home with just 2 bags because things are more expensive than before. I mean, for tomato, we could buy like 10 pieces for 200, but now we're buying about 8 pieces or 7 pieces for 200 naira.
The rising cost of living is leaving no sector untouched. Owuza Shady, a tailor, has doubled the price of some of her clothes in the past 2 years to keep up with escalating costs of fabric and sewing tools.
So 2 years ago, the price of making this outfit would usually go for 25,000, 20,000 naira, but now, just 2 years after, it would go for 35 to 40,000 naira for the exact same style. And this is because the cost of fabric, sewing materials in general, are now way more expensive than what they used to be.
Nigeria exited recession last year, but growth is fragile, and the International Monetary Fund says recovery will be subdued as the West African country grapples with double-digit inflation, dollar shortages, and the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year's crash in the price of oil, which accounts for more than 90% of its foreign exchange, led to acute shortages of forex and put pressure on the naira currency.
I would hope that the economy of our country is more stable. Stability is what I hope for, because right now everything is up and down. Prices are going up, coming down, fluctuating. The value of our naira is not growing or falling at any pace at all. So if things are stable, it's easy for us to see where we're going. Right now, nobody knows what's happening.
Dollar shortages mean traders are forced to buy forex in the black market at a higher price to pay for the goods they sell, passing on the cost to consumers. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
A growing mountain gorilla population is cause for celebration and concern in Rwanda. Located on the Rwandan side of the Virunga Mountains, the Volcanoes National Park has witnessed a rise in the number of the primates. But now, authorities say the park needs to expand to accommodate the growing population. Asta Tal has more on how officials are tackling the issue.
Rwanda's Volcanoes National Park is considered a conservation triumph. The park has managed to increase their population of mountain gorillas. In 2010, a census carried out by the park recorded 880 of the primates. In 2015, 1,063 mountain gorillas were recorded. But the growing population has posed challenges.
The interactions themselves changed in the sense that they became very violent, and during this period, we recorded 7 silverback deaths. So that's again a consequence of more groups ranging in the same area, really not expanding and going to the rest of the park, and that leading to more intergroup interactions and then more infanticides.
In an effort to combat this, the park is looking to expand.
So we are aiming in the next 10 years to expand the park by 37 square kilometer, which correspond to 23% increase of the effective habitat of the park. And as part of this process, we are going to relocate people, estimated around 4,000 households.
Authorities say they will compensate displaced families, housing them in newly constructed model villages. A prototype is already visible in Musanze, a district which contains the largest part of the Volcanoes National Park. Astatal, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live. Coming up in business news. Tunisia drafts an economic reform plan as it seeks a new agreement with the IMF.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Tunisia's central bank governor has expressed optimism on reaching an agreement with the International Monetary Fund early next year. But economists say the country needs to implement structural reforms before such a deal can be reached.
Tunisian Prime Minister Najla Boudin said her government started developing a draft agreement with the International Monetary Fund on a new program, which is expected to send positive messages to foreign investors and friendly countries and help Tunisia improve its sovereign rating.
Tunisia has no choice but to put in place a concrete reform plan in partnership with the IMF. The government cannot provide financial resources from international donors if it does not reach an agreement with the IMF.
The Tunisian government intends to devise an economic salvage and recovery plan. The economic reform program will be discussed with the IMF in 2022. It will be based on a participatory approach, which involves all national organizations and economic sectors.
The problems facing the Tunisian economy are structural. The IMF urges the government to negotiate with all its social partners so that the urgent economic reforms are not blocked by social unrest. Tunisia needs a new social pact which guarantees stability. Otherwise, the reforms will not happen and the economy will not rebound.
The Finance Ministry announced that consultations between the Tunisian government and the Bretton Woods institution have already started.
The negotiations with the IMF will take place amid an unprecedented economic crisis in Tunisia. Therefore, the authorities will make many sacrifices. The government needs to convince the population that the reforms are necessary. Otherwise, it will not be able to implement any change or reform.
Authorities in Tunis plan to cut the public sector wage bill to 15% of gross domestic product from 17.4% in 2020. The government also plans to restructure the debt of state-owned companies and to impose the gradual removal of subsidies on food, electricity and natural gas by 2024. Prime Minister Najla Boudin and the governor of the Apex Bank declared that Tunisia has always met its foreign financial commitments. The central bank and the government are working jointly to present a Tunisian project to the IMF in the first quarter of 2022. Abdel Shawashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta has expressed satisfaction with the progress of the 27.1-kilometer Nairobi Expressway. During the inspection visit, President Kenyatta laid the final box girder bridge a year after the first one was laid. Once complete, the 8-lane elevated dual carriageway is expected to significantly decongest the busy Mombasa road and reduce travel time for commuters across the city. The project, undertaken by the China Road and Bridge Corporation, is being built through a public-private partnership. The president affirmed Kenya's commitment to continue working with the Chinese government, which he said continues to be Kenya's key development partner. The project has created over 6,000 direct jobs, benefited 200 subcontractors and hundreds of each of other local suppliers of building materials. The road is scheduled to be opened by March 2022.
We have done so many roads in our inner cities, over 400 and some 20 kilometers of road that have been done in Mathare, in Kibera, in Mukuru, and in many other places, to ease also transport for our people who live in these areas. And the difference that is being occasioned by the road building, by the drainage being put in, by the sewage being put in, I do believe that within another 2 years, Nairobi will be a truly 21st century city, catering for its population in a positive manner and in a manner befitting our people.
As the end of the year approaches, it is also a busy season for shopping in China. Experts are noticing several new trends in China's consumption market this year. Jiang Xishuan has more.
Lights, lights, lights everywhere. There's many a dreaming scene to behold, from the lights themselves to lovely booths they decorate, all symbols of the beauty and cheer of the year-end celebrations.
I visit markets like this every winter. They have a romantic atmosphere which my friends and I enjoy very much. And the markets have become warmer and more comfortable than they used to be. The food now is more delicious and more delicate.
When I was studying abroad, I visited winter markets like this every year. And now Shanghai too has winter markets with a nice atmosphere. There are lots of Shanghai shops with Shanghai brands.
For many Chinese young people, warming themselves beside a fire while having happy snacks has become a ritual in a chilly winter season. But for many small goods sellers and restaurant owners, night markets like these are a good way for them to overcome the business winter they've been suffering from COVID-19. This scented candle brand was founded in 2019, just before the COVID-19 outbreak. Though the candles were mostly sold online, the pandemic still hurt. But now the innovative night markets have helped the candles to spread their fragrance much further than ever before.
Previously, we sold 300 to 500 candles on Taobao every month, but now we managed to sell 300 to 500 in just a single weekend. Markets like this make the shoppers more relaxed and give them a chance to get to know us directly. The rents here are lower than those for a fixed booth in a shopping mall, and there are different themes for different seasons, like the coffee festival a month ago.
Half our revenue comes from the market. At peak times, in just 2 days we can get 120,000 customers at the booth, where our downtown stores draws 10,000.
A lot of the support for the thriving night markets comes from the property giants. Jing'an Carry Center has been operating its Anyi night market since 2019, and is a big help to dozens of small and medium-sized vendors.
The pandemic has changed the way people shop, so that some vendors have had a hard time surviving. The night market lets us gather the vendors together, and it also brings in the customers they need. Some of the vendors have turned into hot brands after joining the night market. Some of them have even held pop-up stores in our shopping mall.
Official data shows that China's total retail sales of consumer goods rose almost 14% year-on-year to almost 40 trillion yuan in the first 11 months. Some estimates say the country should be the world's largest goods consumption market by the end of the 14th five-year plan in 2025.
Previously, small and medium-sized vendors were stuck in a particular area with a relatively fixed consumer group. These markets can help them jump out of their original circle and reach out to new consumers. And by going online, they can stay in touch with even more consumers and lower their rent, too.
All these emerging trends are creating product upgrades, new sales channels, and a better understanding of how new consumer groups can be created and served. Lee says the key to all this lies in how brands big and small can improve their image in the minds of consumers. The idea is that instead of chasing the shoppers, you encourage the shoppers to come to you. This holiday season, it certainly seems to be working. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
And coming up in sports news, South African figure skating champion Matthew Samuels all set for glory at the Beijing Winter Olympics.
How would you create your